I have no quibble with how my life is going these days. And if every miserable step along the way is what I needed to get here, I'd take them all, you know?
I'd like to welcome to the show, Susannah Grant. How you doing, Susannah?
I'm great. Alex, how are you?
I'm doing very good. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I've been a fan of your work from 28 Days to In Her Shoes. I love romantic comedies, of course, Erin Brockovich, and even Pocahontas too. When I was coming up
Really?
in the 90s,
I
if
have
you
some
remember.
quibbles with
Well, yeah,
Pocahontas.
I'm sure you do. I'm sure you do. But you were coming in on Pocahontas. You were coming in at that wave of the 90s,
Yeah.
late 80s, early 90s, The Little Mermaid, Lion King, Aladdin. It was just like it was printing money. Printing
Yeah,
money.
they were doing really beautiful work and bringing back the movie musical, which was fantastic. And
Mm-hmm.
so I was really happy to be a part of it. And it's not how we would make a story about Native Americans today, which
No,
shows you that you know, there have been some advances.
but
But I
for its
learned a
time.
ton. I learned a ton. I have not gone back into animation because animation is not covered by the guild. So
Oh, it
I
isn't.
don't. No, it's not. It's actually covered by a different union, oddly, which has to do with the history of animation. But no, writing for I look at Linda Wolverton, who
Mhm.
wrote these huge Disney movies, and the amount of money she has not received for her work that she would have had it
Oh,
been a union project. Anyway, that's another story. But I have not worked in animation since, largely because of that. But it's a really rigorous place to start because the tradition of animation is that the story artists tell the story. Storyboard artists. That was how it was done early in the day at Disney. And Howard Ashman and Alan Menken brought in writers, and that was the beginning of this sort of renaissance that they brought in. So we were writers. I had two partners on that, Carl Binder and Philip Zebnik,
mhm.
and but there were also story artists who considered themselves writers. So there was a lot
Yeah.
of tension in it, which was good and bad, but it was incredibly rigorous. There's no scene in that movie that was written any fewer than 35 times. It was just over and over and over. For your first gig, it's really good. It's like a boot camp.
Yeah, and I mean, seriously, because I was going to ask you about Pocahontas, but since we started there, why don't we just keep going?
Mm-hmm.
Because I have friends who are animators. I've been inside the Disney studios. I see how they work, and he told me all about the process and the directors and how they work with the storyboard artists. But it must be frustrating as a writer to have basically storyboard artists
Mm-hmm.
dictating story as a writer, and it must have just been this really interesting thing to deal with as a
Yeah.
young writer as well.
Yeah. Well, and I haven't been there in the sort of post Pixar universe, and
Sure.
I don't know how they're doing it now. And at the time, the animation tradition is very profound and sacred to people. So you don't want to dishonor that. I was still in film school, when I got that job.
How'd
So,
you get the job?
I my first year of film school, I won the Nickel Fellowship, which is a
Okay.
fellowship that the Academy gives. And that just gives your work more visibility, and then you start meeting folks, and I did. And I was in school. I was still in school. I had a second year of film school. So I would get offered jobs that just smelled like really bad jobs that would go nowhere. And I had the luxury of being able to say no because I was in film. I was in school. So it had to be appealing enough to pull me away from getting my master's, which I want to get. And then eventually, after I said no to a few things from Disney Animation, I learned quickly that saying no doesn't mean they'll never ask you again. It just means they'll offer you something better. So eventually they came to me with some ideas like, we don't even know what this is. It's just a word, whales, just whales. And I thought, no, I don't, that movie's never, ever getting me. By the way, all the things they pitched me before this,
Yeah.
there were about 5 of them. None of them have gotten made. So
Really?
I actually had a wonderful teacher in film school named Jerry Cass, and I would sort of float it by him, and he'd go, nope, don't do it. Don't do it. And then they called one day and said, this one has a release date. And I thought, nah, all right.
All right.
Duck out of film school early for something.
It's a whole Pocahontas. Yeah, it's the whole Pocahontas thing. I think it works. Yeah, I think we have a release date. It's going to go.
Yeah. So, I was new and I was green and I was humble. And I had 2 other writers who were great pals and great writers. And, anytime it gets rough, for God's sake, you're doing a Disney animated movie and I was never unaware of how fortunate I was. So even on the difficult days, I was happy to be there.
Yeah, it's a magical place. I've been in and many times at Disney Animation, and it's a beautiful, wonderful. And I've heard stories. I remember Tangled was in development for 10 years.
Really,
they did everything on it. I saw the art, which was completely different from what we saw. A year before release, stripped it all, start again, and they did that with every single movie since Snow White.
Yeah, they'll take it apart.
Oh,
yeah.
They are not precious.
And the great thing is when you're working on one of them, when we were working on Pocahontas, Lion King was in its finishing stages. So we had the advantage of being adjacent to that work, which was tremendous. And then Hunchback was behind us. So we were aware of that as well. And so, you end up part of this continuum.
It was a magical time. It was that 5 to 10 year window of Disney animation was pretty remarkable. It's hard for people to understand because it was pretty much dead in the water.
Yeah, it was
until Little Mermaid showed up, and then we're like, oh, okay.
Until Alan Menken and Howard Ashman came in and said, we can do that.
Katzenberg came in and started doing some stuff. And there was some young animators.
My first professional meeting was a meeting with Jeffrey. I think it was at 7:30 in the morning on Mother's Day, Sunday.
Of course.
There was some rigor to that outfit.
To say the least.
Yeah.
So your first writing gig was out of school, was straight into Disney Studios working with it. So after you're done with that whole process, you then started working on television. You went into Party of Five, which
I really hadn't had a plan to work in television. My sort of house of worship growing up was a movie theater. So that felt like the sort of form of American storytelling I was dying to be a part of and contribute to. And that was a conversation I wanted to be a part of. But I got this pilot shown to me that was made by Chris Kaiser and Amy Littman called Party of Five. And it was beautiful. And it felt like my sensibility, and they were the best people in the world. And I didn't, and so I went and did that for a bit. Which was
you did that for a few years. And so let me ask you, what were some of the biggest lessons working in that writer's room and really kind of, because it's one thing is being a feature writer and another one's being a TV writer. It's a grind. It's a daily grind with television as opposed to feature screenwriting, which is you take your time, you can dance a little bit.
Also a daily grind.
It is. No, it is. No, I was about to say.
Just a lonelier daily grind.
Right. But a lot of times if you're doing a spec or something, you could be on that spec for 5 years. This is like there's a deadline and you gotta go.
There is.
Yeah. What'd you learn?
It's funny when I look back at it, I really think of the lessons I learned less being about craft and being more about how do you choose to live this writer's life. That was a remarkably wonderful group of people who were kind to each other and supportive of each other and funny, and you could share your idiocy with them and they would only love you more, and this is exactly the kind of environment you want for a beautiful collaborative workplace. And it's sort of set in my head that as a bar. And I've really actually been quite fortunate in that I've had very few professional collaborations that have not felt like that. I mean, I've had them, and you sort of work through them as quickly as possible, but but that was the biggest lesson there, that for me, not for everyone. There are people who thrive in chaos and conflict, and their best work comes out of it. For me, that is the environment that brings out my best work. So that was one lesson. And the other was, you just keep working on it till it's good enough. You just keep working on it till it's good enough. And I would put the scenes up on my wall, because you sort of outline it together. And I would have a bar for myself. I wouldn't put a red check mark on it saying it was done, until I had surprised myself in the scene and turned it into something that I hadn't anticipated, or found something within it that I hadn't anticipated would be there from the outline. So it just, I found, I guess, a bar that made the work feel alive and interesting, as opposed to flat and dead. The scene where X happens. Well, if it's the scene where X happens, how can you make that alive? How can you surprise yourself? How can you surprise your viewer? How can you find an element of it that you didn't know was going to be there going in, which is the most exciting stuff to watch, where humanity sort of peeks out unexpectedly.
So you mentioned that, you've obviously had some not so harmonious collaborations. I think in the business in general, we all have that. We all have to deal with that at one point or another. Do you have any advice on how to walk that path a bit, and depending on collaborators and who you're working with? Because we're talking about, there's the difference between a PA's collaborating with a director and a writer collaborating with a director, or an executive producer on a show, things like that. How do you deal at that higher level when you're with collaborators?
Boy, it really all depends on who that collaborator is and what their particular approach to work and a work environment is. I've had ones where I've worked with a director where it felt like, how to say this delicately, ego was a big presence in the room at the beginning.
No.
And then just by sort of sitting there, it felt like there were three people in the room at the beginning: me, the director, and the ego. But if you just sit there calmly and say, and just don't dance with it, don't dance with it, don't engage it, don't fight it. Just if the creative vision matches, gradually, sometimes that will just ease its way out of the room, but sometimes it won't. Sometimes it's just like, sometimes you are working with a chaos monster and you will never see eye to eye. There are a couple projects where I look back on it and I realized I was holding on to my job so hard that I lost grip of the film, and there's one movie I look back on and I think, oh, I should have walked. Not for me, but maybe if I had walked, the director, this is an original too. Like, I would never walk off an original, but maybe if I had walked, the director's always going to win, right? Maybe if I'd walked, they would have found something that wasn't what I wanted it to be, but was better than what it ended up being, which was sort of a mishmash, of try a mishmash between that director's idea of what it should be and mine, And
when something like that happens, how blamed are you as a writer for the success of that project?
The good and bad of the sort of director worship is that not so much. It was a good spec. It was a good original script, and it wouldn't have gone into production if it hadn't been. But it's just one of those things. If you don't share a vision, sometimes it won't come out the way you want it to.
And a lot of times I've noticed is that ego, when the ego is the third, I love that term, by the way, the ego is the third person in the room. It's because of either fear or insecurity. And once they feel that, like, oh, this person is not going to hurt me, that we're on the same page, it does kind of recess a little bit.
Yeah. I had the really wonderful good fortune of working with Curtis Hanson. And he was just the most wonderful man and wonderful filmmaker. And I think I learned a lot from him, because he would point out something in the script that didn't quite work, quite make sense. And I would say, yeah, it does. Yeah, it does. And I'd fight and hold on. And then he'd say, you always lean in really kindly and say, no, 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 Susannah, this is a good thing. This means we get to go find a better thing together. It's great. And he would see every problem and he would always say, no, 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 this is a good thing. And you make a whole movie with someone who thinks that way, and it starts to inform your own thinking, and you start to see problems as good things. And I think that does feel less threatening sometimes to partners if you walk in saying, I know that things can always get better. Let's keep making it better till we run out of time.
And that's kind of the TV mentality as well, the TV writer,
right?
Because not as much the features writers, from my experience and from who I've talked to, it's not as much. It should be, but it's not as much sometimes.
I mean, feature writers are so rarely given the opportunity to have
that too
in their work. So, and often have the experience of it not getting better or not getting closer to what they had wanted it to be at the outset, but further from it. So, working with Curtis was a blessing, because that's not the norm, I think.
And
he was incredibly lovely and generous.
He was wonderful. He's a wonderful, wonderful filmmaker. Now, you did write a little film called Erin Brock something or other a little while ago. And how did that project, Erin Brockovich, come to life? Because you are credited the only writer on that. So I'm assuming this is an original, or were you hired?
It was an original. Yeah, it was. Okay. But it was, I had just written Ever After. And it was very, classic. Which I love. And I'm not the only writer on that. The director came in and he did some rewriting with his partner. So there are 3 credited writers on that. But I had just done that, and I love it, but it was very sort of precious and delicate.
Sweet.
And, I mean, she's meaty too, which is good. But I just had in my head that the next thing I wanted to write was, I had this phrase, kick-ass broad, in my head. And I don't know why. I was like, I don't know. I just said kick-ass broad. And I went to have a general meeting at Jersey Pictures, and Gail Lyon was there and told me this story. And they had met Erin through a chiropractor, because, that car accident that starts the movie actually wonked Erin's back out. And she then would go to a chiropractor. Well, Michael Schamberg, who was like the president or something of Jersey at the time, his wife went to the same chiropractor. So that's how they heard Erin's story. So they had optioned it. And I was, I don't know that, I mean, maybe Pocahontas had come out. But it certainly, there was nothing that would suggest that I was the right person for the film, except for that I knew that I was. And I think they said at the time, well, actually, we're out to Cali Corey. And I was all right. So in 2 weeks, I called up and said, hey, just wondering if you'd heard from Cali. And they'd say, yes, now we're out to Scott Frank. And I'd sit for 2 weeks, and then I'd call back. And it was, I think my polite persistence wore them down. I just kept calling and saying, did that other superstar writer pass yet? And eventually enough of them passed, and I had checked in often enough that they said, all right, well, we'll let you meet her. And then Erin and I got on like a house on fire. So
and it just took off from there. There's the dialogue in that movie is so beautiful. I still remember that scene of like numbers. I'll tell you some numbers. I was just sitting there in awe, because I was like, that's such a wonderful comeback to a guy obviously hitting on her in this. Yeah. It was so beautiful. And Julia Roberts was
both their performances. Her and Erin Eckhart in that scene are just wonderful. And, Steven Soderbergh directed it perfectly. And, that's one of those, I had 2 films in production at the same time. And one of them, I was on the set many of the days. And the other one, I was also pregnant, so I wasn't there that much, honestly. And then Erin Brockovich was shooting at the same time, and I was never on that set. And Erin Brockovich looks exactly like the movie I had in my head. And the one where I was on the set every day looks nothing like the movie that I had in my head. So, does being on the set make a difference? I don't know. I don't know. That can sometimes, but if it's not the right team,
So why do you
sort of
Steven got what you were doing, and that you guys were both mind melded, apparently, that got that same vision on screen.
He saw what I saw, and I don't know how much of it was suggested on the page and how much of it just was the luck of two people who happened to see something the same way, though didn't really talk about it that much.
Right. So what was it like working with Steven? Because that was a heck of a year for him, if I remember correctly. He also did
Traffic.
He also did that other little movie called Traffic the same year. It was like, it's unheard of what was going on in his career at the time. And he's a legendary filmmaker, and he's a fantastic filmmaker.
I didn't work that closely with him. So
really, it was just not at all. Really, that's fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you met with him obviously a bit.
Yeah,
right.
I did. Yeah.
You met with him, but he just read the script. Is like, I'm good. Let's go.
Yeah, basically. I mean, nothing's that simple, but yeah.
Fair enough. So then the Oscars come around, and you get a nomination.
I did.
And what's that like? At that point in your career, you're only like what, 5-6 years in at this point?
I don't know. I don't know. I guess. Yeah. It was interesting at the premiere. I saw Amy Pascal, who has always been extraordinarily lovely and great. And, we've had a nice, done a lot of nice work together. But I saw her. This was early on, and I knew her. And after the premiere, I was filing out of it, and she pulled me over and she said, "This never happens." And I thought, well, maybe it does, and maybe it will again. Like, she was just telling me, this is remarkable. Appreciate it. It's wonderful. It's great and strange, and you think this is, something I've dreamed about, and then also, does it matter at all?
Yeah. Were you that clear? Were you that clear-headed at that time in your life? Because I know as we all get older, we look back and like, but when you're younger, coming up, like the Oscar.
Yeah, it's probably about my family of origin, but those were not our values. Like growing up, they just weren't, not better, not worse. They were just other. So, I did, I brought my brother and sister to it, and they thought it was a kick, so.
Sure. It's fun. It was a fun ride. It was just a fun ride.
So it isn't like, I don't want to denigrate the Academy at all. It's a lovely thing they do. And it's nice. And it's also incredibly surreal. We were sitting at the ceremony, my husband and I, and he said, "Boy, if you dropped down from outer space into this theater, you would think that this is our God."
What an amazing observation. He's so right.
It is a bit of that. But it's lovely, and the Academy is great, and to have the fellowship of all these remarkable people who've told the stories that ordered your brain growing up and into adulthood is just an incredible luxury, and to be part of that community to be fair
to your husband, he's not wrong at all.
He's not wrong.
No, he's not wrong at all. And in Hollywood, that is other than the dollar, the Oscar is quite close second, if I'm not mistaken. So you go through the ceremony, you go through all of this, all the hoopla. Then, because I've had many Oscar winners and Oscar nominees on the show before, and I love asking what happened after. How did the town treat you afterwards when you got all this? Because the spotlight's on you, and there's a window. There's a window of time where you're the it girl, the it guy. What was that like? What was that kind of journey for you?
Honestly, it just I'm a bit of a hustler, and I don't ever honestly I don't like thinking about awards. I don't have any. I mean, I'm thrilled to have received some awards in my time, but I don't have any of them any place I can see them because I just don't. I don't know that would do anything good for my head. So what I am aware of is that it up your price. Like, it's great. Your agent asks for more money. And I think writers should get more money always. So
Yes.
if you can do that, if you can bump up your price, great.
Then just keep rocking and rolling.
Exactly.
Because it's
No, I'm being more diminishing of it. I guess what I mean is it probably did stuff, but I'm so afraid of resting on laurels, and it never, ever, ever makes the writing easier. In fact, I think it might make it harder if you pay attention to it. So, it doesn't make any difference if you were out, at the Vanity Fair party till 2 the night before. You're going to sit down at your computer, and it's not going to be one iota easier, not one iota. So in terms of my work, no difference.
Yeah. It almost seems, the work itself, it almost seems, because again, speaking to so many who have gone through what you've gone through, it seems almost like a burden in a certain way, because now
I didn't win, so it wasn't a burden. It was Cameron Crowe's burden.
Yeah, it was Cameron. Yeah, exactly. But the burden of like, if it gets in your head of like, oh my God, what's next? Oh, I have to do this, or I have to do that. It does kind of tweak with you a little bit. But one thing I've really fascinated by talking to so many, accomplished screenwriters like yourself and filmmakers, there's still a neuroses in their work. They still don't think in many ways that they're like, it's still tough. I still don't think I'm good enough. I still think someone's going to walk into the room at any second and go, what are you doing here? You're not supposed to be in here. Security, get her out. Is that kind of the vibe? Do you still feel in many ways?
Well, the second part, not anymore. Second part, I mean, I've been doing this a long time, and I've got a lot of friends, and we all
security's not taking you out.
No, but absolutely, it's still challenging, and you're still facing a wall every day. But that's the fun of it. It doesn't feel like fun, but it is what makes it interesting. And B, I don't think the work is much good without that. I think it's sort of like what I was saying earlier about what I discovered about writing scenes in Party of Five. If I feel like I can do something and I'll just whip this one off, it's not going to be good. It won't. And I always have to feel that as if there's something I'm trying to figure out. And I like a little bit of panic associated with my work. Very early on, I knew Herb Sargent, who was Alvin Sargent's brother, and I was talking to him very, very early on in my career, and he said, "Oh yeah, every time Alvin takes a job, he calls me up and says, I can't do it. I got to give the money back." Now, I think Alvin Sargent has written some of the most beautiful movies I've ever seen, and he was a lovely man. And I thought, okay, Alvin Sargent is tying himself in knots and saying he has to give the money back. Maybe that is not a glitch in my system. Maybe that doesn't mean I don't belong here. If Alvin Sargent has proceeded with that and done the work he's done, maybe it is, in fact, an integral part of good work. So that was an early gift.
When you're writing, do you have the experience of sometimes being in that flow where when you're done writing, you look at it and go, I don't know who just wrote that, but that's fantastic?
I don't look at my work right when I write it that carefully. What I tend to do is look at it the next morning, look at the prior day's work. Usually I go over the prior few days' work before I start writing. And it is kind of exciting when you look at something and you don't really recognize it. It's pretty great.
It does have, and it's kind of like what we all strive for, is to have that flow moment that you just are there and it just kind of goes. What is your schedule like when you write? Do you actually have a time? Do you like Eric Roth has like this time and he sits on his DOS machine?
I do. I've got a pretty set day. I've spent some, I'm actually just getting back into it now because I'm finishing post on a movie I directed, but I have a ridiculously early wake up, but actually many writers I know have this wake up. I get up at 4:30, I make a cup of coffee. I work for well, it used to be when my kids were at home, I would work for 3 hours, and then that was long enough to get into some sort of groove so that I could, go do the breakfast thing, get folks off to school okay, and come back and still feel as if I was invested in the work. Anything less than that, it would be hard to get back into it. So I needed about 3 hours to feel like, oh, I got to get back to work, And then I usually write till about midday-ish, 12:01, something like that. And then, business stuff, emails, fucking around, what happens in the afternoon.
Fair enough. So let me ask you a very simple question. What is it about writing that you love? What keeps you? Because this is tough. It's tough.
Very early on in life, like as a kid, I got this idea that this whole life thing was a massive ripoff, that you only got to live one of them. Like there are infinite numbers of, this was before the notion of multiverses entered our consciousness, and who knows, maybe that changes everything. But I thought it's just a ripoff. I only get to be me, and I don't get to be that cowboy, and I don't get to be that, that sanitation worker. And I don't get to be that. Like, that seems so unfair. It just seemed like someone had presented a massive buffet and said, you can have one shrimp and that's it, And so just imagining other existences started really, really early. And for a while, I thought, I might be, and I might go at it via acting. And I did that for a little bit after school, but it just dispositionally, the life didn't work for me. And I got bored doing it. I do a show 2 nights in a row, and by the third night, I think I just did this. Why am I doing it again? So you're clearly I didn't have the right mentality of
your life on Broadway
every night. I don't know.
Life on Broadway is not for you. It's basically
no, like anything more than a 2-night run, and I was out.
Very short career.
Yeah, but then I was, fairly lost in life and didn't know what I was going to do, because I also thought I might be a journalist, which is also another way to sort of gather up experience. Mm-hmm. And then that didn't seem like the thing either. And then I moved to San Francisco, which is what you do when you have no idea what you're doing, because no one else there knew what they were doing either. And I was really lonely. So I tried writing a script, and I thought, oh, this I could do. This I could do for a long time. Like, just keep creating a world over and over of my own imagination. Yeah.
That's beautiful. That's really beautiful. It seems like you had a thirst for life, and this is the way you kind of suck the marrow out of the bone of life in many ways.
Yeah. I mean, I do think it's important to say they were fairly torturous years finding that, and I talk to a lot of young people who sort of, just are hungry, understandably hungry to figure out how to get to a place, and you really have to go through some gnarly stuff to find out who you really want to be. And maybe I always want to say, listen to yourself. Maybe this will be what you want to be, but maybe something else will come out of the blue, and be open to it. Keep your ears open. Because if I had just had like my nose to the grindstone with acting, I would have had a very unhappy life, So the uncertainty and the fear and the panic and sleepless nights and all that, I think they're important to pay attention to, and they can lead you someplace good, if you listen.
If you listen, that's the very key point there. Now, you got a chance to direct the film, your first film, which is Catch and Release, which I loved, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
So I saw that film.
Funny,
I loved it.
movie.
It's a fun little, wonderful little film. What was your biggest lesson directing? Because I know you directed a bit on television, but it's a bit different.
Yeah.
It's a bit different.
Well, really, it's my lesson from that film was less about directing, although there are a bunch of those, and more about being clear on the movie you're making. And Amy Pascal, that was a Sony movie, and she and I have talked about it since then, but that movie should have been a $5 million Sundance movie. But she gave me, I think it was $30 million to make the movie. And I kept thinking, doesn't feel like a $30 million movie, but she's writing the check, so I'm not going to argue. And then as we got close to shooting, it became clear, and I guess we just hadn't spoken to each other clearly enough beforehand, that she had expectations of a kind of romantic comedy that I didn't think were inherent in the script. And so all during production, we were trying to sort of pull it into something that would hold on to what I loved and deliver on what she felt she had bought. And like I said, she and I have talked about it plenty since then, and it has a lot of lovely little moments in it, but I think we spent too much money on it, and so it has an ending that is sort of a classic romantic comedy ending, which wasn't where we started. Just trying to deliver on a sort of studio product that it probably shouldn't have tried to be. So that's the lesson there, is just be really clear up front with what movie you're making with the people who are giving you the money. because eventually they're going to want what they bought.
Exactly. And as they say,
which will mean you driving to the set every day, like rewriting the ending way too much. But I had some great partners on that. I was working with a cinematographer named John Lindley, whom I've worked with many times since then. And he made a bunch of movies, and every now and then I would just sidle over and say, and just ask him a question. He always had a great answer. So when you're reading a script, when you're shooting a film, how can you tell which scenes are not going to make it in the final cut? And he said to me, well, if it says flashback. And so since then, I've thought I put a very high bar on any flashback I use, because somebody who had made 20 movies before me said he'd shot a bunch of flashbacks that didn't make it in cuts. Why is that? Just a lot of wisdom like that.
Night shoots. Yeah, night shoots. Rainy night shoots. Try to get those out of the script for production.
Funny you should say that. I have pictures of us at night in just looking like drowned rats, because we were in Vancouver, where of course it rains constantly. But I really love all the performances in that movie. Yeah. I think everyone does a beautiful job. And I think I learned also that I don't think I had fun doing it for about the first half of the shoot. I think I was so intent on being ready and prepared and professional and, successful at the job that I forgot to have fun for a bit. And actually having fun for me is a really important part of that job. It makes you relaxed. It makes other people relaxed. It is a fun job. It's an incredibly fun job. So it should be fun. And relaxing. There's always a feeling I have at the beginning of any scene of, oh God, I hope it works, before you shoot the first shot of it. And the play when it doesn't quite, and the play of finding that, again, that unexpected thing within it, and is really enjoyable, really fun.
So as directors, there's always that one day on set that you feel the entire world's going to crash it down around you. Now that should be every day if you're doing your job right. But there's that one day that you're just like, I don't know if we're going to make it today. I don't know if I'm going to make my day. I don't know if I'm going to get this shot. What was that day for you, and how did you overcome it?
On Catch and Release?
Yeah.
I'm going to preface this by saying that one of my, I've heard it's very good in terms of longevity, but one of my qualities is that I do not remember bad stuff that well.
That's excellent.
Oh God, no, I can remember. There was a scene we were shooting that was supposed to be the last scene. And, like I said, I just kept trying to deliver an ending that would fit with the movie. And we ended up reshooting it because I knew it wasn't that good, and the actors knew it wasn't that good. It wasn't what it should be. And none of us were saying it out loud. We were just trying to deliver on it. And it was this like, this big, it's that when you're, the only thing that's uncomfortable is when you're doing something, you're trying to tell yourself it's working and it doesn't. So I stopped doing that then. Yeah, that was a bad day.
Did you, but
we reshot it.
So yeah, when you're going through that though, it does take a certain level of confidence within yourself in the skill set you have to either say, stop, this is not working, we need to just stop it from here. But this was your first big.
It was my first thing. I didn't know to do that. I would do that in a heartbeat now. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Like, we're wasting film, we're wasting time. Let's just stop and figure out if this is worth our while. Yeah.
And on the set with an amazing cast that you have, or anytime you've directed, have you had to deal with opposing opinions of what the story should be, and having to fight, whether it be crew members, whether it be studios, whether it be actors? How do you overcome that as a director?
Sometimes you do, and sometimes you don't, right?
You win some and you lose some.
And, look, you have to accept that it's a collaborative art form, right? And you're hiring people not just for their face and body, but for their inner life. And like I said, when I was those two films before, you never really know until you get into the sandbox with someone if you have the same idea of what you're building, So, and sometimes it turns into something else that is different than what you had in mind, but is really remarkable too. There was one performance, and I won't name it, but the first couple days I was thinking, oof, this feels really different than what I had in mind, but she seems really committed to it. It ended up being a fantastic performance. She won awards for it. It was so, you have to leave yourself open to the idea that your partner has a great idea, and it might challenge your idea. And sometimes it makes it better, and you just have to be alert to when it's not doing that, Yes.
I think one of the themes of this conversation is listen to yourself, listen to the gut, listen to your instincts for both those sides, whether it's something like, I think this is going to go awry and going to crash into a wall, or I feel there's something here, I don't know what it is. Let me just step back a little bit and let's see what happens.
Yeah. I mean, it's all you have, right? Everything came from your gut. It's just, and I think that the conscious mind, when it comes to creativity, is probably the least important element. I try to write. The reason I write when I write at that hour is that I think I'm still kind of asleep. There's part of your sleeping brain that's still engaged, and I get my coffee all set the night before, so I don't have to do much. I can go pretty quickly from sleep to work, because I think your unconscious and your subconscious are more alive at that time, before you've made lists and phone calls and cooked eggs and whatever else you're doing that's boring.
That's a very interesting thing, though, because you're right. You're kind of like in that in between sleep and awake stage. Your brain hasn't really turned on yet, so it's not the noise of the crap that we have to deal with, the voices in our head and all that stuff, is a little bit quieter. So you can kind of just tap into whatever that ether is to get the ideas and the flow, correct?
Yeah. And you also can convince yourself at 4:30 in the morning that you're the only person awake on the planet. It feels like it's just you and the moon, and, great.
Fantastic. Now you also worked on a little film called Charlotte's Web.
I did,
which is such a beautiful film. I mean, it's such a beautiful story. How did you approach adapting literally one of the biggest children's classic books ever? How do you approach that?
Well, it's interesting because in the beginning, I spent a lot of time in Maine on the actual lake where E.B. White wrote. So I'm very reverential of his work and that work in particular. And I thought, okay, straight up faithful loyal. And I got about halfway through the script and I read it and it was just dead. It was just flat and dead and lifeless. And I thought, okay, that's not going to work. So I infused it with just more life. And I thought the book will exist as long as humans exist. This book will never go out of print. Everyone will read it, love it. It's a different medium. It has to have different dimension to it. So I did that. And then I don't remember what happened. It could have been that I went off to make Catch and Release. At some point, I ended up having to leave, and Carrie Kirkpatrick came in, who's a wonderful writer and a very funny writer. And he sort of he brought a whole other, element to it as well. So that's the thing. You just can't feel like you are just typing the book. It won't have the life it needs. It's the same thing when you're writing a story about a real person. You have to. I the first time I did it was with Erin Brockovich, and I knew her and I really liked her and really admired her. And I would start writing and I would think, well, I'm not sure what she would do here. Maybe I should ask Erin. I'm not sure what she should do. And then I thought, God, I feel like I'm writing with handcuffs on. So I decided in my head, there are two Erins. There's the Erin whom I really enjoy and admire. And then there's the Erin I'm writing. And they're totally different. And I'm just going to trust that I know her well enough. And I'm interested in just representing her truthfully, but this one's mine. And I ended up with a much more faithful representation of her than I would have had I not given myself that license.
Yeah, and that is a mistake I think a lot of people who adapt do, is they, whether a real life person or a real life story or a book, because I remember watching The Godfather behind the scenes and watching what Francis did with the book, and he just, what he pulled out what he wanted. He was constructing a blueprint, and it was wonderful to see his process. It was amazing.
Yeah, but you really have to be master and commander when you're writing something. It has to be your world. You're in charge. Nobody over you. It's and obviously then it goes into production and then you're making a film and then other voices. But when you are writing that script, you have to feel you're in charge. And you're the ultimate authority on it.
Now, if you had a chance to go back and talk to that young film student pre-Pocahontas, what advice would you give her?
Well, none, because it worked out really well. So obviously, if I had known more then, maybe I wouldn't have, I don't know. I used to worry a lot about, I would turn in a script on Friday and I would be apoplectic until Monday. And so I think I don't do that anymore. Obviously, I want people to like my work always, but I don't turn myself into, knots over it. And I may try to tell myself ease up a little, but I don't know, maybe that level of anxiety is what pushed me to make my work better than it would have been otherwise. So I wouldn't say anything different.
Fair enough.
You can't. I have no quibble with how my life is going these days, and if every miserable step along the way is what I needed to get here, I take them all.
Isn't that a great life lesson? Because a lot of people want to avoid all the bad stuff. I'm like, but the bad stuff what makes you grow. The bad stuff is what gets you to that, and it also gives you character to be a better writer.
Yeah, and then when that's what you share, that's what people respond to. The whole point of these stories is for people to feel seen. For people to make the world a little less lonely. People watch something and say, "Oh yeah, I feel that too. Maybe I'm not the only one who feels that. Maybe I'm not the only one going through this." And you're not gonna do that without living hard in the difficulties of life, you know?
Mm-hmm. Without question. I'm going to ask you a few questions I ask all of my guests.
Okay.
What advice would you give a filmmaker or screenwriter starting in the business today?
I struggle with this one a bit because the on-ramps are different now than they were when I was starting. You can make your own films so cheaply now. And so I would tell people to do that as much as possible. But the quality of your work remains the same. Be hard on yourself. I don't mean punishing of yourself on a personal level, but be demanding of your work. Set your bar high. I do this thing at the end of every script. When I think it's ready, I read it as if I were an actor and I had a lot of options. And I try to figure out, if I have a lot of options, am I going to do this one before all those other great options? And that's a way I hold my work to what I think is a higher standard. So I would find those ways you can push yourself to make your work as good as it can be, because nothing's worse than putting work out there that isn't ready, that you could have made better. And then you're just disappointed in yourself and you're not getting yourself where you want to be. Do your best work. Do your best work.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
I mean, rough and very school marmy, but that's what my advice is.
Now, what is the lesson that took you the longest to learn, whether in the film industry or in life?
Oh, golly. I wish I'd paid attention to these before we spoke. I'm going to have to come back to that one.
We'll hold it there for a second. All right. What did you learn from your biggest failure?
That I can survive failure.
That's a good lesson to learn.
That there are worse things than failure. Honestly, it can be rough if you are achievement oriented and failure averse. It can be painful, but that failure is not death. Failure is often something you can learn a lot from.
It is the process. It's part of the process. You have to fail. If you win all the time, you learn nothing.
And they're great. There is gold in failure. It's painful, and the other thing is that our work is public, so failure is public, and so you feel embarrassed and whatever. But there is real gold in failure. Looking at something and say, okay, well then next time I won't do that.
And what are 3 screenplays that every screenwriter should read?
Okay, well, first of all, every screenwriting logistical problem is solved somewhere within the script of Tootsie. So
yes,
learn Tootsie. When you hit a wall, think, what did they do in Tootsie? And you'll find some way that one of those, I think it was 6 writers, figured out a logistical challenge. So Tootsie is a good one. Witness, because it's spectacular and it shows you how little dialogue you actually need to make a moment meaningful. Gosh, it's hard not to say Godfather Part 2, right?
Right. God, 1 and 2, you could put them together. That's a
okay,
cheat.
good.
Yes, a cheat. You can put 1 and 2 are considered the same for me. Yeah, I mean, you can't watch. I mean, all is.
But then there are ones that I just adore. All the President's Men. Every scene forces you into the next scene. There's no point. You can't drop into All the President's Men and not stay till the end. It is the most propulsive movie. And to look at that and think, how did they do that? Fantastic. And then there's, I'm giving you more than 3.
Please
then
go for it.
Running on Empty by Naomi Foner.
Yeah.
Just the most beautiful movie. And it's a great opening. You meet River Phoenix and he's playing Little League Baseball. And this is a guy who is not attached to anything because his family, for those people, his family is on the run. And he can't really play baseball because he's never been part of it, but he's playing anyway. And someone says to him, I'm not going to quote it accurately, but one of the first lines he says, someone says to him, why do you even play? And he says, baseball is my life. And it's the most wonderful first line for a character, because in that moment with this guy who has not been allowed to put down roots anywhere. In that moment, baseball is his life. And it's shallow. And it's such a great first character introduction. So that's another one too. I could go on all day, but we will.
I mean, Chinatown, Network. I mean, Shawshank. I mean, you could just keep going.
Network is the movie that got me into movies. I should have said that one.
Is that
Nashville?
really?
How about Nashville?
Oh, Nashville. Altman. I mean, the player. I love the player. I just love watching the player. They don't do those pitch. They don't. Yeah, of course. They don't do those pitch sessions anymore like they do in the player, do they?
I think they do.
But they don't buy pitches as much as they used to.
No, they don't. They don't. Well, it depends on who you are. I mean,
sure,
I think
of course.
They're probably not like that anymore. No.
Yeah. Those, and let me ask you, the days of like the 90s, the Shane Black days and the Joe Esterhaus days where they were just dropping 2 mil, 3 mil, 4 mil, 5 mil on spec scripts. Mm-hmm. Those days are pretty much gone.
I think. I mean, spec script can still do really well.
You still get, there's a million, 2 million, but they're rare. Before it was just like water.
Yeah. I feel like I had this theory in the first couple decades of doing this that was it was what I called the pile of stupid money, and it moved. And when I first started, the pile of stupid money was all in specs, in film specs, right?
Interesting.
And it was just like, I don't know where the money was coming from, but it was massive amounts for, and then the pile of stupid money moved into TV overall deals. And there were just these crazy overall deals. I mean, I'm sure for a while there, it was,
actors had network deals, like overall look deals and stuff.
I don't know. I think those piles of stupid money might be disappearing in the corporate conglomeration of our business. They look a little harder at their spreadsheets than.
When I had somebody who was the president of Richard Donner's company back in the 80s. Can you imagine? And he's like, I was there 10 years. And he goes, what was it like working with Dick on some of these projects? And he's like, this is how it would go. He would read the script. He got Lethal Weapon. He read it. He said, I want to make this movie. He'd call up the president of Warner's. He goes, I got a script. I want to make it. And the president of Warner's goes, cool. And no discussion of money. Whatever Dick wanted, Dick got. It's like, and never like, oh, you only can make it for 30. But he was very responsible. He was a hit maker.
Yeah, and he had delivered consistently.
Right. And he's Richard Donner, for God's sakes. So that was, and I'm like, really? He goes, yeah, that's when filmmakers ran the studios.
Yeah.
Now they don't, not as much.
You read the Mike Nichols biography. And every time they got to the discussion of the catering table, it's a very detailed and beautiful biography. But I would think, man, you could not, I can't imagine getting that catering budget now.
Was it that extravagant?
Oh, he had the most spectacular catering.
Really? Yeah. Lobster and sushi every day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Steak.
Nothing but the best.
And last question, 3 of your favorite films.
Oh, well, I said them. Rocky. Right up there. I adore Rocky. There isn't a bad scene in Rocky. There isn't a bad scene in Ordinary People. That movie is just perfect and brilliant. I'm going for the unexpected ones. Look, I love all the movies everyone loves. But my Little Secret Treasures, I think Truly, Madly, Deeply is an incredible.
I love that film.
Gem of a film.
Oh, Alan Rickman. God bless his heart.
Yeah.
Isn't that the movie? Yeah, he was. Yeah, he was in. He was in that movie, wasn't he? Yeah. Of course. Yeah. That was such a great film.
I mentioned Running on Empty and Witness and The Way We Were is just so beautifully written. There's a screenplay. There's an unconventional screenplay. The first.
For its time, yeah.
I don't know how long it is. Maybe it's the first 20 minutes are flashback.
Mm-hmm.
It's incredible. Great. Maybe it's more.
Well, I mean, if you want to talk about, and I'm gonna pat you on the back here for a second. I mean, the introduction to Erin and Erin Brockovich. I've had people who are teachers of screenwriting who teach that scene as a beautiful, or almost perfect introduction to a character, because you learn so much about her in a short period of time. It is condensed. It is wonderful. It is comedic. You feel for it. You connect with, because if that scene doesn't work, you're done.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're
But if
done.
you have Julia Roberts, guess what? That scene's
Well, and you have
Steven Soderbergh, and
right, exactly.
Yeah.
But
there's also, I like when movies that's, thank you for saying that. But there's also in Silkwood, one of the first things, one of the gnarly things to do is name all your characters, right? Like everybody knows who everyone is, without saying, "Hey, Bill." And early on in Silkwood, they pull up to the Kerr McGee entrance, and they're all carpooling, and they lean out the window and say their names so they can get into work. It's fantastic. It's just,
and you set it up. It's done. It's perfect.
Yes. And then, here's a really good one. Okay, Dog Day Afternoon.
So good.
Frank Pearson came to AFI when I was there, and he showed that movie, and he talked about it. And he talked about the very beginning. And, he comes in and he takes the gun out of the flower box, and it gets all messed up. And it's very early on. And he was talking about that scene. And he said the important thing to do was tell the audience you can laugh in this movie. And I had to tell them right up front. And it does that. It says, because if you hadn't had that, if you got well into what happens in that bank and then expected people to laugh, they wouldn't have done it. So that's a good little lesson there too.
Yeah, because that's a slightly intense film.
Yeah, but you feel free to laugh when you can, because he said right up front, go ahead.
Susannah, I can keep talking to you for hours. I appreciate you coming on the show so much. Thank you so much for being on the show, for the amazing work you've done throughout your career, and continuing to be an inspiration to so many screenwriters out there, my dear. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Alex. It's very nice to talk to you. You have a great day.
Thanks for watching. Click on one of the videos below to continue your journey, and don't forget to subscribe.